Online on Periscope, apparently. Waiting for YouTube
Yep.
and Twitch. Twitch is the main thing we kind of stream on.
Yep. Cool.
Uh, was there? Okay, yeah, I think we're live on Twitch.
Okay.
Let's do the old sound check, apparently. Yeah, we are good. Okay. Hi, Stefan.
Hey.
Hey, welcome.
Things.
Yeah, good. Thanks for coming on. Yeah,
Yeah. New show. Always good to chat about Bitcoin and Lightning and like the Lightning gaming space, which I know you are big in.
yeah, it's we decided to do a niche of a niche podcast to talk about gaming and lightning. If Bitcoin isn't niche enough, we go lightning, and if lightning isn't niche enough, we go lightning gaming. But
Lightning gaming. Yeah, it's another level.
yeah, it's niche now, but hopefully, this is what brings Bitcoin mainstream, or at least helps along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Anyway, just hello to the audience. For those who don't know, this is Lightning Lap. It's the show where we talk about Bitcoin gaming and get our host to do a lap around Satoshi Village, but more on that later. My very special guest today is, I'm very excited, and I know I always say I'm very excited, but today I am actually very excited. We have the famous, I would say, Stephan Livera. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Just before I start, I just want to remind you of a little anecdote. I think when we first met in Japan, I don't know if you remember this, but I think a lot of people got a little bit drunk and some people bailed out, but there were three of us and we headed to karaoke.
Yes. Yes. You, me, and Teriko.
Teriko, yeah, you remember well. I just thought when we went there, I decided to sing a song especially for you, knowing that you have like an Austrian background and libertarian principles. I thought, I'm going to sing "The Taxman" by the Beatles. But
Yeah, great song. Because the context of that song was like, I think they were so pissed off about tax, and so they were like, this is like a tax protest song,
yeah, it was. I was surprised because like most Bitcoiners don't know about it, but I thought like it would be like the one of the Bitcoin theme tunes. But yeah, you're right. I think the Beatles, I think they wrote it because they were like, the official tax was like 95% suddenly, but they had to pay back
Yeah,
taxes. So it ended up being
yeah,
like
yeah,
105% or something.
yeah. I mean, I don't know the full context of it, but I can, as a libertarian, I can certainly appreciate the desire to rage against the taxes, and certainly I appreciate that. So, and I mean, I kind of knew all that story. So, it was one of those ones that had been floating around, and obviously the Beatles, very famous band. So you kind of, yeah, it's a cool story.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a list of kind of Bitcoin songs together for when we can all meet up again. So we got like Money by
What
like
about Eric Prince, Pump It Up? You know that, don't you know, Pump It Up?
no,
You
yeah,
got to.
I know that one. Okay, yeah, Pump It Up. Yeah.
But there's what about that other one? Do you remember? This is like an OG song. It's you know, I have been holding for the longest time. Whoa.
No,
For the
I'm not.
longest time. Zao Tongs. That's it. Zao Tongs. They
Okay.
did their own parody version of it. So that was incredible. That's back from like, I think 2013 or 14. It was like
Yeah,
a real OG kind of parody song.
I
Really
want.
good one. It's on YouTube if you
Was that
search
like a
Zao
Bitcoin
Tongs
song?
holding.
Was that a Bitcoin?
Huh?
Well, it wasn't a Bitcoin song. It was a normal song, but somebody did like a Bitcoin version.
Yeah. Someone made like a parody song and turned it into a Bitcoin song about hodling, right? So I think,
Yeah.
and it might have even predated the hodling term. So it was actually about holding, not hodling.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe because I don't know if it's true, but when I was in Tokyo, I met a guy who was a little bit drunk, but he claimed to have made the HODL word. That was his thing at the Tokyo Bitcoin
Right.
meetup. He said that he was a guy who kind of got drunk and misspelt it. But
Oh, okay. I mean, I guess it's hard to prove these things. Maybe he would have to go back and prove that he owns that forum NIM at least.
yeah, it could
But
be because
I
like,
heard that guy turned into a Bcacher though.
well,
The guy who coined the term that we now use, hodl, that guy turned into a Bcacher.
that makes sense. That gives evidence to his theory because that was the Bitcoin Tokyo meetup, which was run by Roger Ver, and he told me this before
Right.
like Bitcoin Cash existed. So that whole meetup
Right.
kind of, well, that meetup died, and they all went to a Bitcoin Cash meetup.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that makes sense. But he was a little bit angry that like because a lot of people were making T-shirts and stuff, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
and like he like didn't cash in on it or something. He should have trademarked it. I don't know.
Well, it's a costly error, you know. I just got reminded some more Bitcoin songs. There's as Giacomo Zucco might say, that Britney Spears, "Toxic," or System of a Down, "Toxicity." You know the
Sure.
toxicity of our city. You know that one?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
good
Yeah.
Bitcoin ones.
Like there's
Um,
money by like Pink Floyd, right? I guess I'm kind of like a classic rock guy, so all my knowledge of music is like pre 1979 or something.
right.
So
Yeah, yeah. The old school 70s rock and stuff like
a
that.
lot of
Yeah.
rap music though, I
You,
think.
you're into like Iron Maiden and things like that.
Actually, that's more heavy metal. I've recently started to listen to Iron Maiden, but normally it's like Led Zeppelin and stuff. It's I guess like Stones and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
suppose.
yeah.
Yeah,
Led Zeppelin's pretty cool, man. I listened to a few of their songs. I can't remember them off the top of my head now, but
yeah,
certainly some really
yeah.
cool
No
songs
songs about money
in
though.
their catalog.
But like all those bands got hit by this tax in England, which I think is one of the reasons why they all went to America. I think that whole like breaking America. A lot of it
Yeah.
is for tax reasons. So
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like you go to where the frontier is because yeah, it's a bit high risk, but it's also massive opportunity there, and that's just like Bitcoin as well, and that's also like Bitcoin Lightning and Lightning Gaming, right? You're out on the frontier. It's high risk, but it's high reward too. Like there's a massive market out there. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of things that, you know, whether you're a user or whether you are a developer or a builder, an entrepreneur in the space, there's so much opportunity to come in these next, 5, 10 years.
I think this kind of goes into a theory that I think a few people have had, but kind of like Bitcoin is like the punk rock or it is like the rock and roll
Yeah,
movement, right? Like you can't really start a band now and change the world, but um, you can kind of like I think it was David Bowie said I saw in an interview like he wouldn't be a musician now, he would like be a programmer or something. Because when he was young,
yeah,
he wanted to
maybe.
like change society.
Yeah, I think so. I think if you know Conshaw NZ, he's done a talk, and I believe this was Baltic Honey Badger 2019. So we're talking around September or October ish of 2019, and I think that was essentially the theme of his talk. It was like Bitcoin is punk rock. This is like it's a movement, right? It's not. Yes, it's technology. Yes, there's like politics and economics and stuff, but it's a movement. It's about people who care about their freedom and who care about not being censored in the way they want to use their money and save or spend. And so I really think it is that. And, people are starting to see it for that as well. Like if you look at Nick Carter's piece, A Most Peaceful Revolution, or other people, even Tim Draper's kid, I forgot his name. I think Adam Draper.
Yeah, Adam
I think he
Draper.
just recently tweeted out something saying, "Yeah, it's like, the internet is like the empire, and Bitcoin is part of the resistance. It's like you're part of the Rebel Alliance. It's like Star Wars, right? It's like if you're a Bitcoin person, you're on the rebel side. You're fighting for good against the forces of evil.
So if you're a Bitcoiner, you're a Jedi, is what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah."
Yeah.
Well,
No,
maybe like the Jedi Masters are like the real, like they're like the leaders of the, people like developing and coding this out and making the tools for us to use. They're like the Jedi Masters, and a whole bunch of us are just like fighting in the revolution to like give everyone freedom over their money.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I think kind of I think not just like programmers are important, but like people like you and stuff also play a vital role, right? And I think kind of the community in a way is is kind of what the program is programmed for, Um, but yeah, but having said that, it's like Bitcoin. There's not many other disciplines there's not many other things that encompass so many different disciplines, right? It kind of has technology, it has philosophy, it has economics, it has politics, it has all sorts. So, well, let's just start here. Like, so, what was your introduction to Bitcoin? Because you were like correct me if I'm wrong, but you were like a traditional finance guy. Was it PwC or something you worked for? Or?
Yeah, so I used to work in Big Four accounting. That was how I started. So in Australia, I'm a chartered accountant, which is equivalent to like US CPA, and I think in the UK it's also called chartered
Yeah.
accountant. And so that was my career. Like my normie career was being, doing chartered accounting stuff. And so I was doing kind of like internal audit and similar related risks sort of work inside companies and big banks and things. So I was at Deloitte and big banks like Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which is Australia's biggest bank back then. And so I I guess the thing is, I was always interested on the side in terms of Austrian economics and libertarianism, right? So it
Okay.
wasn't really a professional interest that brought me into Bitcoin. It was my side interest that did. But it's just that I had some experience from inside the beast because I'd been inside the banking world and I have some exposure to that and what it looks like inside that banking world. So for me, it's like most people, it was more like my second or third touch point, right? So I think my first touch point was like some Slashdot article, right? And I kind of saw it and just
So
like, oh
you were
yeah,
like the
whatever, Bitcoin. I didn't
stormtrooper.
really understand the implication of it.
I was
And
gonna,
so then the thing that made me like have my kind of sit up my orange pill moment was actually an Eric Voorhees article and now I was reading this in December 2012.
wow, pretty
So
early.
I was
Would
in
you?
like the back of a car on a family holiday back in Sri Lanka, and I was just like scrolling, and I saw this article, and it just hit me. It was just like, wow, this thing could really. It just has these special characteristics, and I think the way Eric Voorhees. Obviously, I have my disagreements with Eric Voorhees nowadays, but still, like he was the one who basically put me onto this back then. And so then, like most people, I started my rabbit hole journey. Then I was like hungry for Bitcoin content. I was trying to find articles and read about it and learn about it. And obviously, one of the early people, is someone like Andreas Antonopoulos, right? There were like YouTube videos and things like that. So I was watching some of Andreas, and obviously, I already had a lot of the Austrian kind of background. So I
Mm,
was already very much like anti central banking and pro free market money. It was just that I sensed that it was mostly hopeless until I saw Bitcoin and was, explained and was learning a little bit more about why Bitcoin might work where previously other things have failed. And so then 2013 was kind of my journey, and I, was periodically writing a few posts here and there, but I wasn't like doing anything that kind of became famous in the community. But I was kind of chatting in the background with people like Pierre Rochard and Michael Goldstein and stuff like that, and I was interacting with Pierre on Twitter and things like that. So that was like my early exposure to this stuff. And so I was following, Nakamoto Institute and just already supplementing with my own understanding from reading Austrian economics and things like that. That was where the significance of it came through for me, really. So it was more like a side interest, but I was, if you will, primed because I was already a fan of Austrian economics, a fan of the free market, anti central banking, and I was already a bit more of a tech savvy person, right? I played games growing up. I had studied information systems at uni in addition to accounting and finance stuff, and I was already a free market guy. So in some ways, I kind of hit the right markers or things that primed me to see Bitcoin for what it is. And so that was what gave me a huge advantage in understanding it a bit earlier than like I think most people did, because a lot of people were thinking of it purely as like, oh, it's only payments or it's only this, that, or the other. And then a lot of people got confused and went into like random altcoins. And for me, it was just never, I was never really like into altcoins. Like I just basically saw Bitcoin. I was like, oh, this is amazing. And there were times where, as you probably know, back in those days, there were all these different coins, like whatever, Aurora coin and
yeah,
PP coin and name coin and colored
yeah.
coins. And I mean, there were so many of these altcoins,
I
and
made a
I
few.
never really found them interesting.
Yeah,
Huh?
I made a few tokens back in the day.
Yeah, right. And I know people tried out things like Counterparty, and
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, there was all these different things back then. But I just never, I guess, like I had heard, oh, Prime coin. Maybe we'll have a coin that comes up with prime numbers. But I never even like bought that stuff or minded. I basically just got into Bitcoin and only Bitcoin, and I've been only Bitcoin the whole way. And so I guess I have a different journey to most people compared to most people, because a lot of people have that journey where they went the scenic route through the shit coins, and then they came back to realizing where Bitcoin was the value. Whereas my journey was a little bit more, I was reading more like Nakamoto Institute and people like Peter Serta, Tuur Demeester, Conrad Graf. Even Safety wasn't around in those days, right? He
mm,
sort of came around a couple of years later. And then so I was chatting with Safety in the background as well, because I was kind of networking in the background with people like Pierre and stuff. And so yeah, so essentially that was how I kind of came into the space. I think at the time, the rhetoric and the narrative was more anti-bank in general, as opposed to being anti-central bank. So my view is Bitcoin challenges central banks much, much more than it challenges just banking. I see a
Sure.
role for banking. It's just that we have to reimagine that role of banking, right? In
Yeah,
Bitcoin, we
something
say
like
you be your own bank, right? You run your own Bitcoin node and blah, blah, blah. But you might still use a service provider, right? So like it could be like the Unchained Capital model, the hybrid sort of model, or it
like
might be more
Strike or
like a
something.
family or community node sort of model, where maybe you run your node for your family and they all kind of onboard to your bank, and you are the banker for your family and your close friends maybe. And so I think that's kind of the model that we have to reimagine. But that's, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
like there's
remember,
so many.
just to kind of
Yeah.
rip on that a little bit. I remember, I think it was Peter Weller I was speaking to once, and he was like, he was kind of drawing the whole scaling debate and everything. And he said something that was quite interesting. He said this isn't what he
Mm.
wanted. It's not an ideal situation, but he would prefer like a Bitcoin where it's expensive to send, but everybody could like validate the institutions that use it, rather than a Bitcoin that's easy to send, but nobody knows what's going on, kind of thing.
Of
So
course.
I kind of
Yeah.
think that was like an interesting point, and that kind of comes down to like I think if Bitcoin, obviously, the more people who run nodes and can manage their node and their keys, the better. But obviously, not a lot of people aren't going to be able to do that. So if there's going to be different layers of trust, like you said, there's like a family bank, or maybe there's just a reputable institution where they have like some sort of open accounting system with Bitcoin. I think it's still a better world. Um, but yeah, but you said quite a lot there was quite interesting. Something that I found quite interesting is that you were already kind of like an Austrian economics guy whilst working in mainstream finance. But what made you like the Austrian economics guy? Like, did you have a moment? Was your family always like Austrian inclined, or did you have like a light bulb
Yeah,
moment,
so
or
the
did it just
funny
like
thing is, so like a lot of young boys, you spend a lot of time on the internet, right? And so for me, when I was like 14 or 15, I would go on IRC, Internet Relay Chat. Now, for people who are a bit younger, you might not know, but that's kind of like an OG internet chat thing, right?
yeah,
So when I was like 14, I was hanging out in funnily enough, an Australian politics channel. And this guy kept linking to Mises Daily articles, right? And I was like, what the hell? That's never going to work. Like anarcho-capitalism is not going to happen. And then like eventually it started to make a lot more sense to me than what I was learning in my high school economics and business studies and those kinds of courses. So it started to just make a lot more sense to me. And then that was where I started to go down the whole Austrian rabbit hole.
logic.
So yeah, so it just logically, it just made so much more sense. Like it just kind of clicked. It just was a much more correct paradigm to think about economics and what's the impact of a minimum wage or the impact of X, Y, and Z government interventions. You start to think of it from that point of view. And so that for me, like I've been into Austrian economics, well, now over half my life, right? Like I'm in my early 30s now, and I was that started that process for me. So kind of around like 15-ish, I started like becoming more and more libertarian. And so then eh, like when you're a bit younger, you kind of read more articles, right? Like you might not be able to be able to digest a full 800-page book, but you start with articles and the smaller books, and then as you kind of get more into it, you graduate up to reading the full length books and economic treatises and things like that. And so that is essentially what informs my perspective. Like when I'm doing interviews or when I'm talking about things or writing, that informs my perspective about a lot of things, coming from a more free market perspective of trying to, yeah, essentially that informs my perspective.
Okay, yeah, so it's kind of like in a way you just got exposure to certain arguments. So I think a lot of the issue is people just never hear the Austrian argument, you know. Um
Yeah,
like like
exactly.
like I to be honest, we don't really like in England we don't really obviously general primary schools and high schools don't teach economics, but but if you ever watch the news or something, it would just be a given that the current monetary theory is the status quo, and I remember just I had a moment when it was actually in Australia. So we were actually in Sydney at the same time. It's surprising we never met because we kind of had our Bitcoin moment at the same time. But I guess we kind of miss each other. But I remember there's a guy who he just said something like uh inflation is a tax on savings or something, and something
Yeah.
like that. And it's like it is a tax on savings. Like why am I saving? Kind of things like little things. We just have to question the mainstream. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
It just takes a bit of learning. And I think that's part of what we're doing with these podcasts and articles and online and social media is that we're doing an end run around the typical top down ways of learning, right? Like in school, they have a curriculum and they've got a certain top down thing where they teach you the Keynesian stuff or the monetarist stuff or the otherwise interventionist stuff. Where do you actually learn the truth? Where do you actually go and
I
learn
think
that? Well, sometimes you got to go and find it for yourself.
a
And
lot of
that's
it is
where,
when you.
yeah.
I was gonna say a lot of it. I think is when you actually start paying tax, and what you kind
Yeah.
of like. My first job was actually in Sydney, Australia. Like my first real job, and normally when you get a pay slip in a company, the tax is kind of it's hidden from you. You don't really see it. But my boss, who was actually he used to be a labor man. He was a quite socialist thinking, but until he started to run a business. And every day he'd give us the paychecks, which in Australia you get paid like every 2 weeks, which is a bit different to the rest of the world. Every day he would give it us. He would say, "This is what I'm paying you. This is what you're getting. This is going to the government." And that actually, I think a lot of people don't see that, but once you start to see kind of tax you pay, I think that is also an educational moment for a lot of people. Um,
Oh, of course, 100%. I had the same phenomenon in terms of obviously I was libertarian, but for many of my friends from university, many of them were lefty type people. But then once they started like earning real money and paying taxes, that was when they started like now they didn't all become libertarians,
sure,
but they
bit
at
more
least they
conservative,
started to
maybe.
have
Yeah,
more of an
yeah,
appreciation for this idea of, hey, why are taxes so high? Why are we paying this much? You know?
yeah, yeah.
So
Speaking to my grandfather, he used to tell me that when he started to work, he used to go on holiday off of the interest of his general savings account. And just
yeah.
like he used to tell young people that you can go on holiday off the interest of your just normal banking account. It would be like it sounds
Yeah,
foreign,
I
right?
mean,
It's
even when I
crazy.
was a kid, like that used to be a thing. It used to be kind of they would teach you because this was back before interest rates were basically zero, and you actually used to get a return from that. And funnily enough, I think it kind of robbed people of the joy of saving and seeing it grow
Mm. Yeah,
because you kind of I think for me, I was one of those people, like, even from a young age, I started working at like 14 years and 8 months, and I was always a bit more of a saver, right? Like, I would buy and I would save. So I think my story is probably a bit atypical, right? Whereas a lot of people come into Bitcoin and then they start to think more about saving because now, they're in this um, environment where I think historically, or at least like when we were younger, when we were kids, it used to be more like, hey, you save up in the bank account and you get some interest. And
yeah,
that used to be a really cool motivation factor for me because I used to feel like, yeah, I'm like
yeah.
saving and
It's all about
I'm getting
incentives,
more
right?
wealth, and
Yeah,
whereas now people are being robbed of that in some sense because if you leave your money in the fiat bank account, you're losing 10-15% per year easily.
crazy.
And
Yeah.
so in terms of purchasing power, right? So um, that is another thing that I think Bitcoin changes for people, and hopefully people will start to appreciate that more once they can start to really truly save using Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, I think it's obviously like I should give a disclaimer. Obviously Bitcoin is a risky asset. Don't put more in than you're willing to lose, etc., etc. But I think for most people, if you work a normal job and you have a little bit of cash money, there's nowhere to put that, right? You're kind of not an accredited investor. You can't invest it in assets or stocks. The best you can do is maybe try and get on the housing market. But I guess Bitcoin is, that accessible asset that anybody, kind of, you know, preserve some of their wealth. It's actually quite interesting. So we Mint Gox, this monthly esports event we do. We started it almost a year ago, the first one in March, and people have basically played games. They've competed in esports competitions and they've earned some Bitcoin. And the ones that have saved that are doing a lot better now since the Bitcoin price. So
Hey, they would have gone like 10x.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It's just kind of, but just that feeling of like you've got something, you've saved it, and it's worth more, right? That it's kind of, and through gaming as well, right? It's a and a lot of these people are kids from we don't know exactly where they're from, but they're people from more poorer countries who've just got like an internet connection and they can just about play. So I think it's quite a interesting kind of a dynamic there. Um, so what? So we were.